Let us see the effect of foreign trade through the example of Chinese toys in the Indian markets. Chinese toys in India. Chinese manufacturers learn of an opportunity to export toys to India. Where toys are sold at a high price, they start exporting plastic toys to India. Buyers in India now have the option of choosing between Indian and the Chinese toys. Because of the cheaper prices and new designs, Chinese toys become more popular in the Indian markets. Within a year, 70 to 80% of the toy shops have replaced Indian toys with Chinese toys. Toys are now cheaper in the Indian markets than earlier. What is happening here? As a result of trade, Chinese toys come into the Indian markets. In the competition between Indian and Chinese toys prove better. Indian buyers have a greater choice of toys and at lower prices. For the Chinese toy makers, this provides an opportunity to expand business. The opposite is true for Indian toy makers. They face losses as their toys are selling much less. Let's work these out. What was the main channel connecting countries in the past? How is it different now? How is it different now? Second, distinguish between foreign trade and foreign investment. Third, in recent years, China has been importing steel from India. Explain how the import of steel by China will affect A. Steel companies in China, B. Steel companies in India, C. Industries buying steel for production of other industrial goods in China. 4. How will the import of steel from India into the Chinese markets lead to integration of markets for steel in the two countries? Explain. What is globalization? In the past 2 to 3 decades, more and more MNCs have been looking for locations around the world which would be cheap for their production. Foreign investment by MNCs in these countries has been rising. At the same time, foreign trade between countries has been rising rapidly. A large part of the foreign trade is also controlled by MNCs. For instance, the car manufacturing plant of Ford Motors in India not only produces cars for the Indian markets, it also exports cars to other developing countries and exports car components for its many factories around the world. Likewise, activities of most MNCs involve substantial trade in goods and also services. The result of greater foreign investment and greater foreign trade has been greater integration of production and markets across countries. Globalization is this process of rapid integration or interconnection between countries. MNCs are playing a major role in the globalization process. More and more goods and services, investments, and technology are moving between countries. Most regions of the world are in closer contact with each other than a few decades back. Besides the movements of goods, services, investments, and technology, there is one more way in which the countries can be connected. This is through the movement of people between countries. People usually move from one country to another in search of better income, better jobs, or better education. In the past few decades, however, there has not been much increase in the movement of people between countries due to various restrictions. Let's work these out. First, what is the role of MNCs in the globalization process? What are the various ways in which countries can be linked? Third, choose the correct option. Globalization by connecting countries shall result in a. Lesser competition among producers. B. Greater competition among producers. C. No change in competition among producers. Factors that have enabled globalization. Technology. Rapid improvement in technology has been one major factor that has stimulated the globalization process. For instance, the past 50 years have seen several improvements in transportation technology. This has made much faster delivery of goods across long distances possible at lower costs. Even more remarkable have been the developments in information and communication technology. In recent times, technology in the areas of telecommunications, computers, internet has been changing rapidly. Telecommunication facilities, telegraph, telephone, including mobile phones, fax, are used to contact one another around the world, to access information instantly, and to communicate from remote areas. This has been facilitated by satellite communication devices. As you would be aware, computers have now entered almost every field of activity. You might have also ventured into the amazing world of internet, where you can obtain and share information on almost anything you want to know. Internet also allows us to send instant electronic mail, email, and talk voicemail across the world at negligible cost. Liberalization of foreign trade and foreign investment policy. Let us return to the example of imports of Chinese toys in India. Suppose the Indian government puts a tax on import of toys. What would happen? Those who wish to import these toys would have to pay tax on this. Because of the tax, buyers will have to pay a higher price on imported toys. Chinese toys will no longer be as cheap in the Indian markets, and imports from China will automatically reduce. Indian toy makers will prosper. Tax on imports is an example of trade barrier. It is called a barrier because some restriction has been set up. Governments can use trade barriers to increase or decrease, regulate foreign trade, and to decide what kinds of goods and how much of each should come into the country. The Indian government, after independence, had put barriers to foreign trade and foreign investment. This was considered necessary to protect the producers within the country from foreign competition. Industries were just coming up in the 1950s and 1960s, and competition from imports at that stage would not have allowed these industries to come up. Thus, India allowed imports of only essential items such as machinery, fertilizers, petroleum, etc. Note that all developed countries during the early stages of development have given protection to domestic producers through a variety of means. Starting around 1991, some far reaching changes in policy were made in India. The government decided that the time had come for Indian producers to compete with producers around the globe. It felt that competition would improve the performance of producers within the country since they would have to improve their quality. This decision was supported by powerful international organizations. Thus, barriers on foreign trade and foreign investment were removed to a large extent. This meant that goods could be imported and exported easily, and also foreign companies could set up factories and offices here. Removing barriers or restrictions set by the government is what is known as liberalization. With liberalization of trade, businesses are allowed to make decisions freely about what they wish to import or export. The government imposes much less restrictions than before and is therefore said to be more liberal. Containers for transport of goods. Goods are placed in containers that can be loaded intact onto ships, railways, planes, and trucks. Containers have led to huge reduction in port handling costs and increased the speed with which exports can reach markets. Similarly, the cost of air transport has fallen. This has enabled much greater volumes of goods being transported by airlines. Information and communication technology, or IT in short, has played a major role in spreading out production of services across countries. Let us see how. It looks like a very nice magazine, but why is not my textbook printed like this? I can hardly read the words in my book. No, my child, this printing press is not for ordinary Indians. Using IT in globalization. A news magazine published for London readers to be designed and printed in Delhi. The text of the magazine is sent through internet to Delhi office. The designers in the Delhi office get orders on how to design the magazine from the office in London using telecommunication facilities. The designing is done on a computer. After printing, the magazines are sent by air to London. Even the payments of money for designing and printing from a bank in London to a bank in Delhi is done instantly through the internet, e-banking. Let's work these out. First, in the above example, underline the words describing the use of technology in production. Second, how is information technology connected with globalization? Would globalization have been possible without expansion of IT? Let's work these out. What do you understand by liberalization of foreign trade? Second, tax on imports is one type of trade barrier. The government could also place a limit on the number of goods that can be imported. This is known as quotas. Can you explain? Using the example of Chinese toys, how quotas can be used as trade barriers? Do you think this should be used? Discuss. World Trade Organization. We have seen that the liberalization of foreign trade and investment in India was supposed by some very powerful international organizations. These organizations say that all barriers to foreign trade and investment are harmful. There should be no barriers. Trade between countries should be free. All countries in the world should liberalize their policies. World Trade Organization is one such organization whose aim is to liberalize international trade. Started at the initiative of the developed countries, WTO establishes rules regarding international trade and sees that these rules are obeyed. At present, 164 countries of the world are currently members of the WTO. The WTO is supposed to allow free trade for all. In practice, it is seen that the developed countries have unfairly retained trade barriers. On the other hand, WTO rules have forced the developing countries to remove trade barriers. An example of this is the current debate on trade in agricultural products. Debate on trade practices. You have seen in chapter 2 that the agriculture sector provides the bulk of employment and a significant portion of the GDP in India. Compare this to a developed country such as the US with the share of agriculture in GDP at 1% and its share in total employment a tiny 0.5%, and yet this very small percentage of people who are engaged in agriculture in the US receive massive sums of money from the US government for production and for exports to other countries. Due to this massive money that they receive, US farmers can sell the farm products at abnormally low prices. The surplus farm products are sold in other country markets at low prices, adversely affecting farmers in these countries. Developing countries are therefore asking the developed country governments, we have reduced trade barriers as per WTO rules, but you have ignored the rules of WTO and have continued to pay your farmers vast sums of money. You have asked our governments to stop supporting our farmers, but you are doing so yourselves. Is this free and fair trade? Let's work these out. First, fill in the blanks. WTO was started at the initiative of dash countries. The aim of the WTO is to dash. WTO establishes rules regarding dash for all countries and sees that dash. In practice, trade between countries is not dash. Developing countries like India have dash, whereas developed countries, in many cases, have continued to provide protection to their producers. Second, what do you think can be done so that trade between countries is more fair? Third, in the above example, we saw that the US government gives massive sums of money to farmers for production. At times, governments also give support to promote production of certain types of goods, such as those which are environmentally friendly. Discuss whether these are fair or not. Impact of globalization in India. In the last 20 years, globalization of the Indian economy has come a long way. What has been its effect on the lives of people? Let us look at some of the evidence. Globalization and greater competition among producers, both local and foreign producers, have been of advantage to consumers, particularly the well off sections in the urban areas. There is greater choice before these countries who now enjoy improved quality and lower prices for several products. As a result, these people today enjoy much higher standards of living than was possible earlier. Among producers and workers, the impact of globalization has not been uniform. Firstly, MNCs have increased their investments in India over the past 20 years, which means investing in India has been beneficial for them. MNCs have been interested in industries such as cell phones, automobiles, electronics, soft drinks, fast food, and services such as banking in urban areas. These products have a large number of well off buyers. In these industries and services, new jobs have been created. Also, local companies supplying raw materials, etc., to these industries have prospered. Secondly, several of the top Indian companies have been able to benefit from the increased competition. They have invested in newer technology and production methods and raised their production standards. Some have gained from successful collaborations with foreign companies. Moreover, globalization has enabled some large Indian companies to emerge as multinationals themselves. Tata Motors, Automobiles, Infosys, IT, Ranbaxy, Medicines, Asian Paints, Sundaram Fasteners, Nuts and Bolts are some Indian companies which are spreading their operations worldwide. Globalization has also created new opportunities for companies providing services, particularly those involving IT. The Indian company producing a magazine for the London based company and call centers are some examples. Besides a host of services such as data entry, accounting, administrative tasks, engineering are now being done cheaply in countries such as India and are exported to the developed countries. Steps to attract foreign investment. In recent years, the central and state governments in India are taking special steps to attract foreign companies to invest in India. Industrial zones called special economic zones SEZs are being set up. SEZs are to have world class facilities electricity, water, roads, transport, storage, recreational and educational facilities. Companies who set up production units in the SEZs do not have to pay taxes for an initial period of 5 years. Government has also allowed flexibility in the labor laws to attract foreign investment. You have seen in chapter 2 that the companies in the organized sector have to obey certain rules that aim to protect the workers' rights. In the recent years, the government has allowed companies to ignore many of these. Instead of hiring workers on a regular basis, companies hire workers flexibility for short periods when there is intense pressure of work. This is done to reduce the cost of labor for the company. However, still not satisfied, foreign companies are demanding more flexibility in labor laws. Let's work these out. First, how has competition benefited people in India? Second, should more Indian companies emerge as MNCs? How would it benefit the people in the country? Third, why do governments try to attract more foreign investment? Fourth, in chapter 1, we saw what may be development for one may be destructive for others. The setting of sets has been opposed by some people in India. Find out who are these people and why are they opposing it. Small producers compete or perish. For a large number of small producers and workers, globalization has posed major challenges. Batteries, capacitors, plastics, toys, tires, dairy products, and vegetable oil are some examples of industries where the small manufacturers have been hit hard due to competition. Several of the units have shut down, rendering many workers jobless. The small industries in India employ the largest number of workers, 20 million, in the country, next only to agriculture. Rising competition. Ravi did not expect that he would have to face a crisis in such a short period of his life as industrialist. Ravi took a loan from the bank to start his own company producing companies in 1992 in Hospur, an industrial town in Tamil Nadu. Capacitors are used in many electronic home appliances including tube lights, televisions, etc. Within 3 years, he was able to expand production and had 20 workers working under him. His struggle to run his company started when the government removed restriction on imports of capacitors as per its agreement at WTO in 2001. His main clients, the television companies, used to buy different components including capacitors in bulk for the manufacture of television sets. However, competition from the MNC brands forced the Indian television companies to move into assembling activities for MNCs. Even when some of them bought capacitors, they would prefer to import as the price of the imported item was half the price charged by people like Ravi. Ravi now produces less than half the capacitors that he produced in the year 2000 and has only 7 workers working for him. Many of Ravi's friends in the same business in Hyderabad and Chennai have closed their units. Let's work these out. First, what are the ways in which Ravi's small production unit was affected by rising competition? Second, should producers such as Ravi stop production because their cost of production is higher compared to producers in other countries? What do you think? Third, recent studies point out that small producers in India need three things to compete better in the market. A. Better roads, power, water, raw materials, marketing and information network. B. Improvements and modernization of technology. C. Timely availability of credit at reasonable interest rates. Can you explain how these three things would help Indian producers? Do you think MNCs will be interested in investing in these? Why? Do you think the government has a role in making these facilities available? Why? Can you think of any other step that the government could take? Discuss. Competition and uncertain employment. Globalization and the pressure of competition have substantially changed the lives of workers. Faced with growing competition, most employers these days prefer to employ workers flexibly. This means that workers' jobs are now longer secure. Large MNCs in the garment industry in Europe and America order their products from Indian exporters. These large MNCs with worldwide network look for the cheapest goods in order to maximize their profits. To get these large orders, Indian garment exports Indian garment exporters try hard to cut their own costs as cost of raw materials cannot be reduced. Exporters try to cut labor costs where earlier a factory used to employ workers on a permanent basis. Now they employ workers only on a temporary basis so that they do not have to pay workers for the whole year. Workers also have to put in very long working hours and work night shifts on a regular basis during the peak season. Wages are low and workers are forced to work overtime to make both ends meet. While this competition among the garment exporters has allowed the MNCs to make large profits, workers are denied their fair share of benefits brought about globalization. A garment worker 35-year-old Sushila has spent many years as a worker in garment export industry of Delhi. She was employed as a permanent worker entitled to health insurance, provident fund, overtime at a double rate. When Sushila's factory closed in the late 1990s, after searching for a job for 6 months, she finally got a job 30 kilometers away from where she lives. Even after working in this factory for several years, she is a temporary worker and earns less than half of what she was earning earlier. Sushila leaves her house every morning, 7 days a week at 7:30 a.m. and returns at 10 p.m. A day off from work means no wage. She has none of the benefits she used to get earlier. Factories closer to her home have widely fluctuating orders and therefore pay even less. The conditions of work and the hardships of the workers described above have become common to many industrial units and services in India. Most workers today are employed in the unorganized sector. Moreover, increasingly conditions of work in the organized sector have come to resemble the unorganized sector. Workers in the organized sector, such as Sushila, no longer get the protection and benefits that they enjoyed earlier. Let's work this out. First, in what ways has competition affected workers, Indian exporters, and foreign MNCs in the garment industry? Second, what can be done by each of the following so that the workers can get a fair share of benefits brought by globalization? A. Government. B. Employers at the exporting factories. C. MNCs. D. Workers. Third, one of the present debates in India is whether companies should have flexible policies for employment. Based on what you have read in the chapter, summarize the point of view of the employers and workers. The struggle for a fair globalization. The above evidence indicates that not everyone has benefited from globalization. People with education, skill, and wealth have made the best use of the new opportunities. On the other hand, there are many people who have not shared the benefits. Since globalization is now a reality, the question is how to make globalization more fair. Fair globalization would create opportunities for all and also ensure that the benefits of globalization are shared better. The government can play a major role in making this possible. Its policies must protect the interest not only of the rich and the powerful, but all the people in the country. You have read about some of the possible steps that the government can take. For instance, the government can ensure that labor laws are properly implemented and the workers get their rights. It can support small producers to improve their performance till the time they become strong enough to compete. If necessary, the government can use trade and investment barriers. It can negotiate at the WTO for fairer rules. It can also align with other developing countries with similar interests to fight against the domination of developed countries in the WTO. In the past few years, massive campaigns and representation by people's organization have influenced important decisions relating to trade and investments at the WTO. This has demonstrated that people also can play an important role in the struggle for fair globalization. Summing up, in this chapter we looked at the present phase of globalization. Globalization is the process of rapid integration of countries. This is happening through greater foreign trade and foreign investment. MNCs are playing a major role in the globalization process. More and more MNCs are looking for locations around the world that are cheap for their production. As a result, production is being organized in complex ways. Technology, particularly IT, has played a big role in organizing production across countries. In addition, liberalization of trade and investment has facilitated globalization by removing barriers to trade and investment. At the international level, WTO has put pressure on developing countries to liberalize trade and investment. While globalization has benefited well off consumers and also producers with the skill, education, and wealth, many small producers and workers have suffered as a result of the rising competition. Fair globalization would create opportunities for all and also ensure that the benefits of globalization are shared better.